I challenged myself to read The Master and Margarita in one weekend, and this is how it went. Hello and welcome to a reading blog. I've created a little challenge for myself, and that is to read The Master and Margarita in one weekend. Now, I don't know much about this book, and this is the vintage classic Russian translations, and I've had it on my shelves for a long time. I read Anna Karenina, I think a couple of years ago now. So it's always about time I picked another one up, and this is the one that called to me. So yeah, that is my plan. So it's actually Saturday morning now. I did start this last night. My goal was to do a 24-hour reading blog, but I am just old now. I am nearly 30. And sleep is very important to me. So I'm doing a weekend reading vlog. But I did start it last night. I read the first few chapters and I actually really enjoyed them. It wasn't what I was expecting, but I don't really know what I was expecting. Not much has really happened except a strange man has turned up and he seems to know things that maybe he shouldn't, such as how and when people are going to die. And he was apparently present for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And so I'm guessing he is the devil. It's not been explicitly said yet, but that's what I'm taking from his general vibe. So I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to go make some breakfast and I'm going to read a few more chapters and see what's going on. So I think this is going to be a spoilery vlog. I just feel like I want to talk about what's going on. So if you haven't read this, maybe go read it and then come back. So in the first sort of few chapters, so we're in Moscow and there's these two guys, a editor and a poet, and they're just chatting. And then this strange man comes up and asks if he can join them. So they're talking about how they're atheists and he's like, you don't believe in Jesus Christ? And they're like, no. And he's like, well, let me tell you a story. Tells them this really long story about the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and this Roman judge who was the one who sentenced Jesus to death. And the story kind of is slightly different to how it is in traditional religious text. And so when he finishes the story, these two men are like, how would you, there's no proof of this, how would you know that that's what happened? And he's like, well, I was there. And they think he's a madman, obviously. But he's been saying other things, he said some weird things about how he knows how they're gonna die, and he looks very strange, he's got one green eye that looks full of madness and one black eye that just looks dead, like a void. They're looking at each other I feel like we should kill someone, this guy is not all there. And so the way that he'd predicted one of them would die, he says it in quite a jovial manner, so they're kind of yeah, all right, whatever. But he says, Anna spilled some sunflower seed oil, that's gonna mean your meeting that you're going to this evening is cancelled. And they're like, oh right, okay. And then he says something about how your head will be chopped off by a woman, and the guy's okay, cool. So he's like, I'm just gonna go call someone and then we'll figure out where you can stay and stuff. And so one of the guys runs off and ends up slipping on a tram track, on the edge of a tram track, and gets hit by a tram and his head gets decapitated. And the other guy's like, oh my god, that's what he said was gonna happen. And he's freaking out, and he's like, this guy planned this. He's clearly not mad, but he's also clearly planned this in some way. Goes back to him and is like, what the hell, how did you know that was going to happen, who are you? And he just walks off. The poet, he's the poet that's not died. He's called Ivan, and he chases after them, but no matter how fast he runs, he can't keep up with them. They have a cat that's the size of a pig, and he sees them get on a tram, using a fare and everything, and he's flabbergasted. And then he's trying to chase the main guy, the guy that did all these predictions. So he's like, wait, no, I know where he is. He's in the river. He's in the Moscow River. So he runs to the river, takes all his clothes off and jumps in. And it's freezing cold. And it's clearly the devil or whoever he is messing with him and putting these thoughts in his head that he knows where he is. And he's being on some wild goose chase. Gets out the river and his clothes have gone. And all that's left is some underwear, basically. So he's walking around Moscow in his underwear. He's now the madman, and he's all frantic, and he's clearly, his head's all messed up. He doesn't really know what's going on. That's where I left off. He's now heading to this building that I think is it's a house where their writers union is, or their trade union, from what I can gather. And the guy that was decapitated was the head of it, and now Ivan is heading there because he's got this new urge that the madman or Satan or whoever it is there. So that's where we're at. But there's a lot happened in 4 chapters. It's kind of crazy. So I've read a couple more chapters. Poor Ivan is locked away in a psychiatric clinic. He did not last long. He went to the Writers' Union house, kind of went a bit crazy, wasn't wearing much, was ranting about this guy that had killed his friend, but everyone was kind of like, what are you talking about? And then he was like, there's this cat and there's this guy, and so the waiters tied him up with napkins, which I found really funny, and they called the police, sent him to a psychiatric unit, but he kept saying the guy's evil and his name begins with W, but he didn't know his full name. But yeah, I'm at 75 pages, but I'm just like really enjoying it. Like, it's just mostly quite easy to read and it's quite funny. This is a bit ahead of where I've been telling you about, but the cat is sprawled in a nonchalant attitude on the poof, a glass of vodka in one paw and a fork on which he had just speared a pickled mushroom in the other. I'm obsessed with the cat. So I've just got to page 100. That doesn't look that far, but I do feel like I'm doing quite well. I found the Master and Margarita playlist, so I'm listening to that while I read to get the full experience. But I've come to sit in our other room because my husband is watching a film. But I'm just looking out into the garden and it's just such a nice vibe. And things are just escalating. And loads of horrible men are getting their comeuppance. Like, not to be on the side of the devil. There's a sentence I never thought I'd say. Loki, I don't care about any of the men he's messing around with. They all seem pretty terrible people, so it's just kind of fun. Okay, I've read a few more chapters, so I'm going to give you a little update. I can't remember what I last said. I think I said Ivan was being taken away to a psychiatric institution. He arrives and the doctor questions them. Ivan tries to protest that he's not mad, he's telling the truth, but obviously no one really believes him. They're all just like, yeah, of course you are. He tries to leave and they stop him and he throws himself at the window attempting to break out, but unfortunately just bounces off the window and then gets sedated and taken away. We next move to a guy called Stepa, who is the guy that got decapitated at the beginning, his flatmate, which is kind of random that these grown men have flatmates. Anyway, he's also the director of a local theatre. He wakes up, he's got a terrible hangover, and as he looks around he notices a strange man in his bedroom. And he's like, who are you? And this guy's like, we had a meeting, like we had a planned meeting, didn't we? And this guy introduces himself as Woland, Professor of Black Magic. So Woland is this strange devil figure that we've been following so far. He says they met last night and Stepa has agreed to let him do 7 performances at his theatre. He has a contract, it's signed by Stepa himself, and Stepa's like, I don't remember any of this, but that is my signature, so it must be me that's just forgetting. He decides to go and sneakily phone the treasurer of the theatre just to check this is legit. He confirms it and he's like, yeah, we got the receipt, like the posters are printed. As he's on the phone, he sees in the mirror a tall man dressed weirdly and a black cat. And he like spins around and they're not there. And he's like all confused and goes back into his bedroom and is shocked to see the tall man and the black cat are in there with Woland. And Woland's like, oh yeah, these are my assistants. And he's like looking at the cat and the cat is sat there on a poof. I think I said this bit, but he's sat there like drinking vodka and eating some mushrooms with a fork. And he's just like, what the hell is going on? Anyway, the tall man's like, you've been behaving pretty badly. You've been drinking loads. You've been abusing your power, especially with women. And we don't think you should be the director of this theatre anymore. And then out of the mirror comes another man. I assume they all have names, but I just don't know their names yet. But he's got bright red hair and a fang, which sounds lovely. He comes out of the mirror and he's like, I agree. And the cat's like, yeah, me too. I don't think you should have this job. Yes, the cat talks. And then Woland's like, I think this flat is getting a bit crowded. Like, we need to get rid of someone. And I think that someone should be you. And then Stepa just like passes out. And then he wakes up on a random pier in a like coastal town that's like miles and miles away. And he's just like, where am I? And this guy is like, you're in Yalta. And he's like, oh, and then he passes out again. So Stepa's having a bad day. Anyway, he's now on holiday in Yalta against his best wishes. We go back to Ivan again, who's woken up at the clinic. He gets visited by a doctor who's like the head doctor. So the doctor's like, why don't you write a statement for the police, and then the best thing for you right now is to rest. Let the police deal with this. If there is a criminal, they'll get him. And Ivan's like, you know what? Sounds like a plan. Then we swap to another man called Nicanor Bosoy. I clearly don't know how to pronounce Russian names. I'm so sorry. He is the chairman of the Tenants Association. So the guy that died, his apartment, obviously, or his rooms in the flat, he goes up to the flat, which is number 50, lets himself in, goes into one of the empty rooms that no one should have been allowed to go in. They've been sealed by the police after they investigated the death. Walks into one of them, and the tall man, the weirdly dressed tall man, is sat there. And the guy's like, who the hell are you? How did you even get in here? And he's like, are you an official person? And he's like, I don't know. Sometimes you're official, sometimes you're not. It changes. Bosoy's like, no, seriously, who are you? And he like tells him his name is Koroviev. He's Roland's assistant. But he tells Bosoy that he's the interpreter for a foreign professor. And Stepa granted him permission to stay there while he was on holiday in Yalta. The tenant chairman is like, no, I don't know anything about this. He's like, look in your briefcase. And he opens his briefcase and there's a letter from Stepa saying like, exactly that he's saying they could stay here. Koroviev is like, this guy, he's a millionaire. Like, just between me and you, ask him for like a shit ton of rent and he'll pay it. He does. He kind of gets manipulated into it. He also is like, can I have some tickets to the performances? And they're like, yeah, here you go. How many do you want? And then Koroviev gives him another wad of cash and is like, thanks so much. And the guy's like, no, I can't take bribes. I'm like, I would be severely punished if I took a bribe. And he's like, no one will know, like, come on, like, there's no witnesses, I won't tell anyone if you don't, kind of thing. And so he does. He leaves. Woland comes out and he's like, I don't like that guy. So Korovyev's like, okay, rings the police and is like, hey, I just have some information for you. This guy has got some foreign currency. It's behind his toilet in his bathroom. Bosoy's having dinner. These two men break in and they're like asking him about this money. Go to the bathroom, find it. Although Bosoy, when he received the bribe, it was not foreign currency. It now is. And he's like, I've been set up. And he's trying to tell them what's happened, looks in his briefcase, the letter's gone, the contract's gone, the rental money's gone, the tickets have gone, and he's like, oh, and then he just gets taken away. I hope that will make sense. I feel like I'm just word vomiting what I've just read, but hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you're following. Okay, it is now 9 p.m. We've taken a little break for dinner. I am 140 pages in, which isn't bad, I don't think. But I'm just going to give a little update on what's been going on. So the treasurer and like the house manager of the theatre are like, where is he? Like, why is he not here? And a telegram arrives from the Yalta police saying they've detained a man called Stepa. And they just think it must be a prank because it's simply not possible for him to have got from Moscow to Yalta in essentially 10 minutes. And then another telegram arrives and it's like, no, it really is me. And then another telegram arrives and it has his signature and his handwriting and tells them they need to keep an eye on Woland. So they put the telegrams in an envelope and they're like, you need to take this to the authorities. They kind of think he's just drunk nearby, but they're like, we can't risk it. We have to take this to the authorities. As he's leaving to take it to the authorities, he gets a call and there's this like really nasty voice going like, don't show anyone those telegrams. But he does anyway. He leaves anyway. Goes outside and manages to get attacked by the cat. And it's the man with the red hair and the fang. And they basically just beat him up. And then they take him to the flat where Woland is staying. And there's a red-haired naked woman who kisses him. And then he faints. I'm getting the vibe she's a vampire. I don't know why. We go back to Ivan. He's crying in his psychiatric clinic, trying to write his statement for the police, but he just keeps getting confused. And then he looks at the balcony and he sees a man with his finger on his lips telling him to shush. And then we go back to the theatre and it's time for Woland's show. So the theatre's like packed. It's time for the main performance and this master of ceremonies guy like introduces them and kind of is like, magic doesn't actually exist, but this is going to be cool to watch and it'll be nice to know like the explanations of how they did it afterwards. Koroviev and the cat are the ones performing the tricks. Wola just kind of sits on an armchair by the side. But they do like some card tricks and then they make the cards appear in the audience bags, but then the cards turn into money and then Koroviev makes money fall from the ceiling and all the audience are like scrambling to get all the money. And then the master of ceremonies guy from the beginning comes on stage and he's like, well, how is this illusion done? And he's like really sort of derogatory, and then Koroviev is like, this guy's annoying me, what should I do with him? And someone in the audience is like, tear off his head. And then the cat lunges at him and pulls his head off and gives it to Koroviev, and the head's like talking. And it's like, no, I'm so sorry, I won't say anything again. He's like, you need to stop talking drivel. And then he puts his head back on. And then Koroviev conjures up like a shop on the stage. That's kind of it for the show. Koroviev and the cat just disappear off the stage. Roland disappeared ages ago. I don't know why he wasn't even there for most of it. But we learn the cat is called Behemoth. And then, more interestingly, we go back to the clinic, and the man that was on the balcony with Ivan is the master from the title. So he's another patient. He comes in saying like, oh, some other guys have arrived. Some more patients have arrived. One guy's talking about like foreign currency behind his toilet, which is obviously the tenant guy. And one guy's talking about how his head keeps coming off. And so he's just like, Roland's just sending people to the psychiatric clinic like constantly. Ivan tells him his story. He believes him. He's like, you know, you got off quite lightly because that guy you met, that is Satan. And Ivan's like, I'm sorry. And then he tells Ivan his story. So he basically is a writer. He wrote a book about Pilate, who's the Roman judge that sent Jesus to death. He sees this young woman one day. They fall in love. They both are married to other people, but they like start an affair. They're like, we were waiting for each other, like the other people. He doesn't even remember his wife's name. And I'm like, that's crazy. They spend all this time together. She's very supportive of his book. And then he finally finishes his book and he decides to like try and get it published, but the publishing world kind of reject it. They're like, no, we don't want to publish that. He becomes quite mentally ill and depressed. She says she'll leave her husband and be with him. She'll come back the next morning. But that night he leaves, goes out in the cold and basically walks to the clinic and ends up like checking himself in. And he basically doesn't want to tell her where he is. He kind of is like, the best way I can love her is by just like not existing. Like, she needs to forget about me. And so now he doesn't even have a name. He just goes by the master. And that is his story. And I'm guessing that woman is Margarita. Okay, I've just come in this room to tell you my final update for the night. So I got to book 2, as you saw. I'm on like 205 pages. And quite a lot happened in that last sort of 40 pages. So we find out the guy, Veronica, I don't know if I ever said his name. I feel like I've been quite bad with names. But the guy that went to take the telegrams and was beaten up and taken to the apartment to meet the naked woman, who we now know is called Hella, by the way. Turns out he's been turned into a vampire. He tries to attack the treasurer from the theatre along with Hella, but he gets away and they like float away out the window, like they like levitate, like proper vampire creepy levitating vibes. And we have some boring chapters where the guy who had the foreign currency, like the tenant guy, has a really boring dream. And then we shift to Ivan having a dream, but the dream is about we're back in Jerusalem, following on the story from chapter 2 about Pilate and Jesus. And it's basically the crucifixion happens. The guy, Matthew, who's a disciple, I guess, he is trying to save Jesus but can't. So he tries to kill him to prevent him from like having the painful death of the crucifixion, and he like watches him get crucified. He curses at God. A storm rolls in. A hooded man comes up and ends up killing Jesus and the other 2 prisoners, I guess to put them out of their misery. Don't know the relevance of that. The religious aspect, those chapters of the whole book, they're the ones I find hardest to read because they're quite, I guess, dry. Then we go back to Moscow, and because most of the management of the theatre have disappeared or gone, this guy called Vasily, who's the bookkeeper, suddenly finds himself in charge, very reluctantly. And so they cancel the show that night. So he goes to the place where he needs to report it and finds like chaos because a black cat has visited and damned one of the chairman of this commission. And he's now just an empty suit. So he like is doing all the things of a human. He's sat at his desk writing and talking, but he has no visible head or limbs. It's just a suit doing it. And everyone's kind of freaking out about it. So he's like, okay, this isn't working. I'll go next door. But as he hands over the money to deposit it, he looks down and sees that it's all foreign currency and he gets arrested. So clearly he's been duped, just like the other guys. And then it's the last chapter of book 1. This one's quite an interesting one. So the guy in the first chapter who was decapitated, his name was Mikhail. I don't think I ever said that, but his uncle comes to Moscow to, as a front, he's saying he's coming for the funeral, but what he's actually doing is he wants the flat that Mikhail had. So he goes to the apartment, obviously can't find the tenant guy or the guy in charge, so he goes straight to the apartment and he gets let in, but all he can see is a cat. The cat is like, show me your passport. And he's like, oh my god, it's a talking cat. And the cat's like, can you not speak Russian? I said, show me your passport. He's like, did I stutter? And then he gets the guy with the red hair and the fang, who we now know is called Azazello. He's like, I don't think he should come to the funeral, and also I want you to kick him out. So the guy, Azazello, for some reason has a roast chicken, hits him with the roast chicken and like throws him down the stairs and then slams the door behind him. But yeah, that's where we're at going into book 2. What's interesting is that we've had one chapter about the master, nothing about Margarita. I'm going to read book 2 tomorrow, so I'll see you in the morning. Good morning, it is Sunday. I have read in bed this morning, which is the dream. I read 2 chapters. We're now reading from Margarita's perspective. Finally. And she is the master's lover. So she's a beautiful woman. She's about 30. She's childless. She's married, but she doesn't love her husband. But her husband is very kind and rich. He's never treated her badly. She has everything she wants. She's very privileged, but she's unhappy because she wants to be with the master. She's been grieving because she doesn't know if he's alive or dead. She decides to go for a walk and she overhears 2 men talking about a scandal where a head has been stolen from a corpse. Now clearly I think it's insinuating that this is Mikhail from the first chapter. So his head's been stolen, which is pretty grim. She then watches his funeral procession, but she doesn't know it's him. And then a man appears next to her. It's Azarello. And he's like, this is Mikhail's funeral procession, and also someone's stolen his head. And she's like, oh, damn, that is crazy. He admits he's there to speak with her on some business. He says, a distinguished foreign gentleman would like to meet with you tonight. She assumes he's insulting her or in some way suggesting she's a prostitute. And she's like, you bitch. And then she goes to walk away. But then he's like, starts reciting some of the master's novel. And she's like, oh my god, how do you know that? You must know the master. He's like, yeah, the master's alive. But if you want to find out any more, you have to meet with this foreigner tonight. And she's like, I'll do anything. I'll do whatever you want. And he's like, well, this is what I want you to do. He gives her this gold box and it's like a cream. And he's like, you have to cream this all over your body tonight at exactly 8:30. And she's like, I mean, fine, like, I'll do that. That night she rubs the cream on. It's like this like yellow, swampy, thick cream. She's amazed to see when she looks in the mirror that she looks younger, like all her skin's clear, her eyebrows are fuller, she's got like all her eye bags have gone, and she feels like super refreshed and strong and full of life, like she feels like a new person. And she's like running around her room like laughing and she's so happy. So she's like grabs a broom that has like danced into the room, and then she jumps on her broom fully naked, flies out the window laughing and really happy. And that's where we got to. Let's do a little update. So it is now 5 p.m. I have got about 100 pages left, which actually doesn't look like that much, but it's kind of still a chunk really. Things have got very bizarre. I think I said Margarita has been turned into a witch. She's now like flying around the city, super like crazy loving life. And then Natasha shows up, which is her maid, also flying, but this time flying on a pig. So Natasha is her maid and has clearly used up the last of the ointment that was left over. And she also used some on Margarita's neighbour, who was this like kind of boring man, and he's turned into a pig that can fly, I guess. Anyway, they land at near like a secluded area, and then they have this party. There's like nymphs there, like naiads, loads of other witches. There's like a goat-legged man, I guess like a satyr. So I guess Mr. Tumnus is there. He's like, flying on a broom is probably very uncomfortable, and then he calls a car. And this car comes and there's a crow with a little cap on flying the car. Once she's back in Moscow, she ends up being taken to the apartment where Woland is staying. So he basically tells her that Woland puts on an annual spring ball of the full moon. So this is Satan's ball, and Margarita has to be the hostess. That's why she's been chosen to be the hostess. And then they finally meet Woland. So they enter this little room and there's a chessboard, And Azazello's there, Hela is there, Behemoth is there, and he's playing chess with Roland. Roland. Oh no, an accidental Schitt's Creek reference. He's playing chess with Roland, and Behemoth is wearing like a little white bow tie and has got his whiskers gilded, which is so cute. Lots of stuff happened. I don't know what's relevant and what isn't, but basically cool things. The chessboard, all the pieces are like alive. They're like little men, which is quite cool. He also shows Margarita his globe, and it's like a globe that shows an up-to-date depiction of everything that's going on in the world. So you can like zoom in and see what's happening right then, which I also think is really cool. So that's where I'm at, and I have about 100 pages left. We've had 2 chapters now that are about Pilate and Jerusalem, and low-key I find those chapters so boring. I just don't get the relevance. I mean, there's probably so much analysis you could get from that. At the moment I just want the crazy fun hijinks about Margarita, and I'm a bit bored of reading about Judas. Anyway, we've not got much left now. I shall carry on. Maggie has joined me. I've finished! Yay! It is 8:30 and I've just read the last chapter and the epilogue. What a journey that was. I don't feel like I have the brain power to actually put my thoughts in order right now. I will update you with what happened in the last sort of 10 chapters and then what my thoughts are. Hello, it is the next day. It is Monday morning and I'm about to start work, but I just thought I would update you on what happened in this book. We left off with Margarita going to meet Roland, and they're like, you need to host Satan's ball for us. And she's like, yeah, I'll do anything if it means I might get to see the master again. So she gets prepared for the ball. She gets like bathed in blood, which sounds disgusting. And then she gets transported through this like tropical jungle and then into this like massive ballroom. There's this big orchestra, and then she has to greet every guest. And there's like thousands of them. And they just keep coming, and all of them are like super evil, like they've all like murdered someone or poisoned someone. But eventually she gets to all the guests, she has to like fly around the ballroom and meet them all, and then once the party's been going for a while, Roland climbs up on this platform and he has Mikhail's decapitated head that was stolen, and it seems to be still alive, like he's just like chatting to it. And then he turns his head into a goblet and drinks blood from it, and then the party ends. So they all go back to Roland's bedroom and the gang are all there, and he's like, because you passed this, you can ask me for one wish, kind of thing. Right, now I want you to ask for something for you. I want you to be selfish. And she's like, I want to meet the master again. I want the master back. And he appears in the room. They have a big conversation, they like update each other on what's been going on, I guess, a big reunion. And they basically give Margarita and the master like freedom. Then we have 2 chapters that are like the Pilate chapters again, which I find quite dry. Pilate gets Judas killed. There's a whole chapter about how he does it. And then we go back to Moscow, and then there's a whole chapter about the investigation from the police into like what's all this stuff that's been going on, which again is a little bit dry, but it's quite funny to see how like incompetent they are. Like they're trying to like catch them, but they never see anyone come in and out of the flat, and they have all these like key statements from people, but all the people that are giving statements are like, please lock me up in like a secure cell because I'm just terrified, kind of thing. Someone says they've seen a black cat, and all these police go to the apartment, go in, and the Behemoth is there just like having a drink, and he's like, I've done nothing wrong, I don't know why you're even here. And they start to shoot him, and he shoots back, and even though they're both shooting each other, no one actually gets shot. And then he sets fire to the apartment and flies out the window along with the rest of the gang. There's an interesting bit where Azazello and Roland are sat on a sunset. They're not sat on a sunset, they're sat on a rooftop watching the sunset, and Matthew the Levite appears, who was Jesus' disciple, and he tells them that Jesus has read the novel of the masters and wants him and the Margarita to be at peace. And Roland's like, yeah, cool, I can sort that out. So it's kind of insinuated that even though they're like good and evil, that they still like work together, which is kind of like a theme of the novel, is that like you can't have good without evil. And then Azazello goes to get Margarita and the master, and she's like, I'm so happy I made a deal with the devil, which is quite funny. And then he gives them a bottle of wine that was apparently a Pilates bottle of wine, and they both lose consciousness, and they think he's killed them, they think he's betrayed them, but then he brings them back, and he's basically like, you needed to lose your connection to your earthly bodies to have true peace. And then he's like, come on, let's go. And they ride off on black horses. They join up with Roland, Korolev and Behemoth. They're all on black horses, and they all fly off into the sky saying goodbye to Moscow. And then they land on this platform in the moonlight when Pilates is there, and he's basically spent the last 2,000 years reliving his decision in like purgatory to like send Jesus to his death. The master and Margarita grant him freedom, and that's the end of the master's novel. It all comes to an end nicely. So he sets off to finally see Jesus again. The master and Margarita are sent somewhere else to live in their like eternal home. And then there's the epilogue, which is basically the narrator telling you what happened to all the people in Moscow after Roland, etc. left. And then it finishes with Ivan, who's become a professor, but every year he still visits the bench where he first met Roland. Why do I keep saying Roland? Where he visits the bench where he first met Roland and like sort of thinks about everything that happened. And that's the end. I hope my explanations made sense, because I felt like I was genuinely in a fever dream. This was such a crazy book. It was like a proper journey. Without giving a full review, I really enjoyed it. There were some dry bits, but overall I absolutely like found it so easy to read. And the other thing I would recommend is, after I finished every chapter, I went and I like read through each chapter's analysis, so that I, one, knew exactly what was going on because I didn't want to get confused, and two, it meant that I got a lot of the like information about how it related to the Soviet Union at the time, and like the context around some of the jokes and some of the satire that's made, which made it a lot more interesting to me. So that really helped me. I'm gonna leave that there for now, and then I will film a little review before I sign off. So this is my review. So I read this in basically one sitting, I guess, like over one weekend. I didn't read anything else this weekend. And I do think that helped me enjoy this so much, because I was so immersed in this like bizarre story. It's very fantastical, but I think you just have to go with it. And this being the only thing I read and doing it in quite a short amount of time meant that I didn't have time to like pull myself out of the story. I didn't stop and start very much. And it meant that I really was just going with the flow. So I think that actually was a benefit. Now, I was a bit nervous going in. I know it's political satire, and I was a bit worried that my ignorance would mean that it all went over my head. I mean, maybe some did. I'm saying that, I don't know what I missed. But I felt like I understood enough of the jokes and the metaphors and the nuance to really enjoy it. I found it really funny. I was obsessed with Behemoth, and how everyone just constantly told him to shut up when he put his like opinions in. All the characters were so interesting and unique, and I don't know if it was because the characters were so distinct, but I just didn't struggle with knowing what was going on and who was who. I just found it a lot easier to read than I thought. Not completely, it's not like the easiest book I've ever read at all, but way easier to read than I expected. Like I said, I was reading analysis of each chapter after I read the chapter. I think that really helped me to like engage with what was going on and feel connected and understand it more. That extra layer of like the political commentary and the metaphors are really interesting and did add a lot to the story. But even if I hadn't done that, I think I would have picked up on quite a lot of the jokes and subtle references, even just having like a light Google now and again. So if you're put off by thinking you don't know much about Soviet Union Russia, I think you should still give it a go if you think you would enjoy this book, because I don't think it's as intimidating as it seems. In general, I loved how bizarre and surreal and weird it was. The writing is amazing. It's really descriptive. It's really lively. It's really like conversational almost. Obviously, it depends what translation you picked, and I've heard that this one that I picked isn't one of the best, but I went for it anyway. I imagine I might reread it one day and try a different translation. But I really enjoyed it. I don't know, I mean, I have nothing to compare it to, but maybe if you are going on this journey, look into what translations there are and what are recommended. And then the themes, I loved what it said about art. I loved how it criticised corrupt governments, because that's very relevant at the moment. I just loved the themes between good and evil, and I thought it was so clever to have Satan be the one that is explaining to people about good and evil and how they are both needed. So yeah, overall I think I've given it 4 stars. I didn't maybe engage as much with the like religious aspects and the biblical references, although to an extent I did find that interesting, but it just wasn't as interesting to me as the like more political stuff. But it's just not often I engage with a book so thoroughly, and it was just an amazing experience to read. I feel like very strongly that reading should be fun, but difficult literature is also fun, and everyone should read difficult books sometimes. I feel like my brain feels more awake than it did before I started this. I feel like I've challenged myself, and I just would definitely recommend. And if you're scared of books like this, just give them a go, because what's the worst that's going to happen? If you've made it this far, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you've read this, let me know what you thought. But yes, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.